Imagine being able to unlock the true potential of your team, to turn challenges into opportunities and create innovation. Can you see yourself leading with empathy, fostering a culture of trust and resilience? Well, in our show today, we're going to talk about the top leadership challenges, reveal how emotional intelligence can be a game changer, and talk about enhancing team well-being to drive organizational success. We'll explore practical strategies that empower you to lead with confidence and clarity. Will is the sum of our intention and action. And while our intent may be to be emotionally intelligent, it is sometimes our actions that fall short. Join us in this episode as we work to define emotionally intelligent leadership, where your actions inspire growth and create lasting impact. This is the Matt Largent Concert. Welcome to the Matt Largent Concert. Because if you're going to screw it up with style. You've got to serve and serve first, and then you have to make that conscious decision to lead.
Oh, if you have any problems, dial information. Thank you for calling.
Hey, and welcome back, everybody. I want to start off by shouting out and being super appreciative of we've upped our listeners, we've upped our followers. You guys have done a phenomenal job of sharing and getting things out there. Last week, we actually had several people that were going back again and listening to some other shows. One of those that I saw a lot of people listening to was Let's Be Real About Fear, which was a show from a couple of years ago that's just talking about the realities of fear for leaders. And just sometimes we have to embrace that suck and embrace the idea that we're going to be afraid. Had so many different other things, employee engagement so a lot of good. The cool thing is after we're getting into the upper 40s now in our shows. We have tons of shows about all sorts of different aspects of leadership and ideas of leadership. And so far, I don't see that we have had any that have contradicted each other, which is kind of cool. So I'm really appreciative of that. Continue to follow. If you're not a follower on Spotify, Apple, or any of the platforms, please 100% get in there, follow along. It'll let you know when shows drop. It'll let you know when new shows are coming up, and it'll let you know if we have any events. It'll send you messages, and don't forget to reach out. I had some really great reach outs and people who gave me feedback. Had a really cool leadership development instructor that works with one of the major institutes and organizations reach out to me and literally gave me like bullet points. Here's what I got out of this last episode. And that was really, really cool. So love to hear from you guys. And so when I was prepping up for this show, I was trying to I wanted to continue off of the idea of ascend leadership. So we just finished that. If you guys have not listened to that, please go back, check that out. All season long, we talked about creating and engaging high performance teams. So we spent literally 2.5, seasons, 3 seasons, whatever, going into and talking about different aspects of servant leadership. And so servant leadership is a huge part of everything that we're talking about. But, I wanted to get into this season and talk about, well, it's great to talk about what the basics of this are. And it was really, really, really big with, huge diverse audience, and it continues to be incredibly diverse, broken up into equal age groups. I was just showing somebody today, top 100 podcasts in 2 different countries right now, which is super, super exciting. But not only that, but we have literally broken up between, early 20s all the way up to 60. Literally, there's like 4 categories in there, and it was in the mid to low 20s in each of those categories, which means that we are really impacting a diverse group, male, female, different ethnicities, different religions, different cultures, different ages. It is awesome. So that was a huge part of what we wanted to do, was to share this and get this out, not just to one demographic, one group, but to all leaders all around the world, all walks of life, all organizations, all levels of experience, that they had something that they could kind of gain from this experience. So mission accomplished. We're doing such a really, really, really exciting job. Just in the last 30 days, having, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of searches, literally added to several libraries, added to downloads. Audience size has increased, and still United States continues to be our largest, with, of course, Oklahoma, where I'm based at, which makes sense because probably a lot of people I know. Virginia continues to be number 2, Texas being the third. But again, just reaching out across the world. Guam continues to be incredibly strong. Germany catching up with them, though. Romania, New Zealand, Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, Lebanon, Spain, Canada, Australia, Denmark, Paraguay, and Sweden. So to my listeners in those audiences, so much I appreciate you. Thank you super, super, super much. A majority of you finding me on the web now, not just on Apple Podcasts, but going through the web, and then Apple and then Spotify. So, just really, really enjoying the connection that we're having with all of you. And so continue to give me your feedback. You can message me through Spotify. You can message me on the web. You can go in and find me on social media at Matt Largent Concert or at Matt Largent. You can find me at either one of those. On Facebook, it's at Matt Largent Concert. I do have a personal Facebook, but most of my followers are on at Matt Largent Concert. That's where I drop a lot of good information. So follow, like, subscribe, whatever you want to do, but let's get connected and continue. Please, please, please send me your input, send me your ideas, send me your thoughts, send me your feedback, because I want to hear from you. So there's my shout out, my huge, hey, I want to hear from you. I want you guys to get involved. Today, I want to share with you guys, as we wrapped up Ascend Leadership, and really, as we got into developmental feedback last week, it kind of gave us a lot of summation. And so I thought, I could sum up again, but I feel like at that point it's almost kicking a dead horse, which is a horrible expression that is used primarily probably here in Oklahoma, but I don't know, maybe all over the world. Let me know. Put it in the comments. But I want to kind of move forward from that and continue to try and get you guys things that are useful and that you guys are going to be able to utilize and that are modern and that are update and helpful. So what I did was I started looking and doing some research, okay? When we're talking about leadership, especially leadership now, and I want to tell you, I don't care if you're a 60-year-old leader, a 20-year-old leader, a new leader, an old leader, somebody who just got into leadership, which has nothing to do with age. One of the things that I always like to tell people is that I have leaders out there that are in their mid-20s. And then I have people who are in their mid-40s that are in leadership. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that just because they're older that they're more mature in leadership. Maybe they waited a little bit longer to get into leadership. Maybe, again, when we talk about servant leadership, it's making that conscious decision to lead. And so, they may not have made that conscious decision until later on in life. It doesn't matter what stage or age you are in your leadership. What matters is experience, knowledge, and wisdom, and working with each other. And it's that desire to lead. And so I have so many young leaders that are in their early 20s all the way to their mid to late 30s that look at leaders that I have that are in their 40s and 50s and going and deferring to them a lot, which is great. Respect your elders, 100%, totally get it. But at the same time, don't forget that you make impact. It doesn't matter how much leadership experience or how much leadership wisdom you have. If I have a person who's been in leadership 5 years and another person who's been in leadership for 6 months, they both have equal impact. Now, does one have a little more wisdom and experience? 100%. But does that mean that they are as good or better or prepared or any of those other things? No. That just means that they have more impact. So it's important that we understand that we all are impactful in our leadership and in our feedback. And so we want to make sure that we have that. But we know that leadership today has an immense amount of challenges. You know, whether you're a 20-year leader or whether you're a brand new leader, today is totally different than it was 20 years ago or 40 years ago in leadership. When I first got into leadership, it was in the early 90s. So I mean like 91, 92. And here we are, 2024. So 31 years I've been in leadership or leadership positions or management, sales, everything under the sun that has to do with leadership, from leading troops in infantry and Marines, and from drill instructor to owning my own business, to sales, door-to-door sales, to restaurant management, to assembly. I've managed and led in a bunch of places. And I got to tell you, I felt like, especially, 15 years ago, that I was an incredible leader, 15 years experience, and I'm really well. And then I really started learning, and I started making a focus on growing. And so I realized that I didn't know jack. I had to continue to grow. You have to continue to grow because it changes. So when you look at today, let's just talk about leadership today. So what I did was I just started doing some research on what are some of the biggest challenges that we are seeing in leadership today. And so just doing a search, I said, tell me some of the most common issues that we are seeing in leadership period today. Google searched it, did an AI search for it, did a Bing search, put them all together and looked at the common ones. Number one, of course, being economic uncertainty. We're talking about a super turbulent time. Economic turbulence, you got market volatility. Leaders have to be resilient and adaptable within their organization. And we just talked about adaptability and innovation. You have got to be very strategic in what you're doing during the economic uncertainty to continue to maintain stability. And so one of the things that I pride myself on in this show is that I am an active leader. And I am an active leader now in a more senior role, but I have continued in a high-level leadership role. And so one of the things I pride myself in is I'm not telling you anything that I am not learning and doing myself. So, for example, we have recently, myself and the organization that I work with, we're making and adapting to changes, understanding that things are happening and that we have to be adaptable to be resilient and to be strong and stable. My employees and the people that I serve are dependent on me to do that. And so I have to be very strong in my strategic planning. Secondly, of course, talent retention and acquisition. Attracting and retaining top talent is a huge challenge. People are shifting in their ideas. People are looking for work-life balance. And I went on a rant on that recently, so I'm not going to re-rant on it. But I'm going to tell you, work-life balance doesn't mean that they're not working a bunch of hours. That's not about how many hours they're working. And so if you miss that, maybe I need just to have a whole show about that. But if you miss that, work-life balance is the idea that we need to understand that work and life are a balancing act and that they touch. Think of it as a teeter-totter, okay? If you don't know what a teeter-totter is, it's that long piece of wood on a fulcrum. It's on that base, and one person's sitting on either side, and when one goes up, the other comes down, and when one goes down, the other. Well, this is that same kind of idea, is that when work takes over and becomes overwhelming, then your life feels like crap. And vice versa. When life becomes overwhelming, your work feels like, you just start, they really have to balance each other out. And that, first of all, you have to realize work and life are not separate. Not for anybody. So I'm not going to, I could keep going, but I want to keep moving for today. Talent retention and acquisition means that you've got to be innovative. You've got to come up with new ideas to engage and retain. You've got to find new ideas to bring people in. People aren't looking for an organization that's just about the dollars and cents. They're looking for a lot more. Third thing that leaders had the biggest fear, or not fear, but the biggest issue or challenge with, of course, digital transformation. Hybrid workspaces are a huge thing, as well as work from home. I can tell you, I have, my wife is in leadership, and she is a leader on an online platform. And they're getting together for, one of the very few times that they do, and it is huge. Just getting together makes a huge impact for them. And so how do we balance these hybrids, and how do we balance the digital and technological advancement? It's crazy. Emotional and mental health coming off of COVID. Now all of a sudden the leaders are increasingly responsible for emotional and mental well-being. We have to be empathetic. Not sympathetic, empathetic. We have to have initiatives that support mental health. We have to have team building opportunities. We have to understand that, it was so much easier in the military. I always tell people, if they weren't injured, they're working. If they're not sick, then they're working. It was about physical well-being more than anything. When I first started in the military, but then as I grew, it became more and more and more about mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. When you get out into non-military, that becomes it. It becomes nothing but emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. And the top sixth, the sixth top thing that leaders saw an issue with that was going on was company culture. Building and maintaining a positive company culture. And I'm going to do that in another show. So I'm not going to get into that right now. We're going to talk about company culture later. So common issues that under researched, just basic searches, Google being all that stuff, AI, economic uncertainty, talent retention and acquisition, digital transformation, hybrid work models, emotional and mental health, and company culture. Well, that's great. But what I wanted to know more about was, okay, what about leaders needing more development, personal and professional development issues that modern leaders are looking up? What are searches? What searches are being done for leaders that leaders are doing that they want to learn more about? And so it was really interesting, the five key things that kept popping up. Okay. And so I'm just going to give you the 5 key things that kept popping up that were personal and professional development things that leaders were looking for. And number 1 was, again, work-life balance. Meaning that leaders were looking for ways to prevent burnout, not just burnout of their employees. I'm talking about burnout for leaders. Being unable to set clear boundaries between their work and personal life, leading by example. Those were, work-life balance was a huge one. Secondly was adapting to change. Leaders are looking to learn how to adapt to change. And again, these are all probably going to be shows all by themselves, because I really felt like if this is what people are searching for over and over and over again, and each of those, now I looked up top 10s, and I looked at a lot of articles. I looked at a lot of, again, Google, Bing, Safari, AI, different AI engines. What were the top searches? of people in leadership position. What about personal and professional? So these are ones that if you've looked these up, you're not a minority by any stretch. You're a majority. So adapting to change was a huge one. How to create and foster a culture of resilience and continuous learning, which we really talked about a lot this season already, but we may kind of dive into some other directions with that as well. Third was building a team spirit. That was an interesting one because that was one I didn't even think of myself, but that is huge. That kind of goes into that culture, company culture or organizational culture, but team morale, man, especially right now with the world and economics and, coming out of COVID and political and all these things, team morale is just on the ropes. So how can we be inspirational leaders that recognize individual and team achievements, to motivation, to maintain motivation, to build trust, to build team morale? Building team spirit was a huge search. And it was one that I probably need to pay more attention to. So that's one that I'm really excited about trying to do some research and doing a show on. Fourth was decision making, which makes sense. This is probably a constant out there, is building, decision making those tough decisions. It's easy to make the fun decisions, but making the tough decisions that are going to impact your teams, your organizations, when you're looking at things that are going to impact your team for months, years, decades. So how do you have an informed and inclusive decision-making process that builds trust and gives you better outcomes, but understanding that the buck stops here, right? As leaders, we want to have inclusive decision-making. We want them to be part, but in the same breath, we have to understand that ultimately we've got to make the final decision and go. And that, we need them to be part of the decision-making, but it's about being heard more than it's about being a vote. It's not necessarily a democracy in that effect, but fair leadership. And so I'm really excited about doing one about that. So building team spirit, decision-making, I think are going to be great ones. Kind of touched on adapting to change. If you didn't get into it, go back to earlier this season. We talked about adapting. I think I talked about a couple seasons ago as well about being a change agent. And so those are great ones. Go back and listen to those. Those are really good. Work-life balance, I want to do one on. The fifth most common thing that we saw was diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we are in a modern time where diversity, equity, and inclusion has shown to be one of the most powerful and inspiring forms of leadership and competencies of good leaders. And I say that because we have to have, they call it DEI. We have to have these DEI initiatives. And it's not just about, well, we've got to look good for everybody. I mean, we've got to look good for our people. And, if we don't do this, then people are going to be they're going to be mad and we're going to get blasted on social media. That's not why we need to do it. I can show you data, and you can Google data. I double dog dare, if you're old enough, you remember that. I double dog dare you go do a Google search for the data and statistics that prove that leaders who invest in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organization are far more successful than those that don't. Because we've got to understand there's different perspectives. There's amazingly different perspectives. Now, I am a somewhat middle-aged, I'm not going to own it yet. I am a somewhat middle-aged white male in middle America. So, honestly, there's not a lot I can say about the plight and challenges of women, of African Americans, of Asian Americans, or Asians, or third world countries, or people who are living in challenges and under dictators. I don't, because I am not them. But I want to hear from them because they bring a whole different perspective to the table that gives me, and it's not that I have to agree with their perspectives, but by being respectful enough to listen to their perspectives, it adjusts mine just enough. Just a small shift in my perception gives me a new perspective that I can change. I can do something different. And so we want to we want to bring together a diverse and inclusive culture in our organization, but man, is that a challenge. Because here I am again, middle-aged, white male, middle America. I am a God-fearing Christian, and so it is hard for me to sometimes listen to perception or perspectives from people with different backgrounds. Maybe they have a very aggressive background, and so they're a very aggressive personality. I don't do well with that. Maybe they come from a whole different culture where if you look at people who live in large cities all around the world, space is limited, and so personal space is at an all-time premium. And so when they're talking to you, they get close and they get loud. And for somebody who's in, middle America, we got a lot of space. We're very spread out. For me to talk to somebody, have a conversation 2, 3, 4, 5 feet away from me is not abnormal. And so when I bring somebody into my organization that comes from a large city on the, east or west coast, or from overseas, a large city, and so personal space to them, they're standing a foot away from me, talking very loudly. It feels aggressive. And so you start kind of freaking out a little bit. But it's so important because they bring so much to the table. So I'm definitely going to do a DEI show. I'm definitely going to do a decision making, building team spirit. That's probably going to be one that I'm going to do very, very soon, if not next week, because that was one that I was utterly, I hear it from my team, but I don't act on it. And I need to do that more. So I'm excited about getting into that a little bit more. And then, of course, talking about, we've already done kind of work-life balance, but we'll get into that a little bit more. Anyway, so setting all that up over literally the first half of the show, I want to say I looked through all of these, and I was really kind of going for what is something that I can bring today to you all that I thought would be impactful. And so when I look at all of these things that we're looking at, it really comes down to something that becomes so impactful to all of these. And so what I want you to think about is leadership today goes beyond merely guiding teams through challenges. It's about turning every obstacle into that stepping stone, into an opportunity for growth. So when you're talking about all these complexities of modern leadership, all the things that you all are facing on a daily basis, one thing stands very clear. One thing stands out. The core of an outstanding leader is the mastery of emotional intelligence. Just like a ship captain that's dealing with the stormy seas, we have to steer our organizations with wisdom and insight that emotional intelligence provides. In the realm of leadership, emotional intelligence is the compass that always points to true north. It's a great quote. And so what I want to do today is I want to explore why this compass is indispensable and how it can transform your leadership approach. Now, emotional intelligence is not a new term. Emotional intelligence is actually was coined in the 1960s. And so, as you can imagine, in the 1960s, not a lot of traction in it. This is still a time where it was dictatorial leadership more than it was a, very strong monotheistic kind of leader. I mean, you were just one leader making all the decisions. Monotheistic is probably not what we were looking for there, but moving on. So it wasn't actually until the 1990s, a guy by the name of Daniel Goleman wrote a book about emotional intelligence that really picked up. Much like servant leadership has been around forever in so much recorded history, it took one guy to write a book about it in the 70s that brought it to the forefront. And so it's cool in leadership as we continue to develop ideas that are centuries and millennia old are becoming popular by some people doing some just research and review and seeing these things. Emotional intelligence is one of those things. Because emotional intelligence really is a linchpin that addresses all of the challenges that we talked about. All the things, all that research, it really gets addressed when we're talking about emotional intelligence. Because emotional intelligence is all about not just understanding others and all of these other things. It's about self-awareness first. It's about self-regulation, and then it's about motivation and empathy and social skills. And so I want to break into those 5 key pieces of what emotional intelligence is. I want to talk about how can you implement some emotional intelligence in the workspace today and use that in good leadership. So let's dive into this and talk about first these 5 things that I just talked about is self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And these are kind of the defining traits, you might say, or competencies of emotional intelligence. And it starts with understanding your own emotions. You've got to understand what your strengths are, your weaknesses, your values, what drives you as a leader. And when we understand ourselves, we become more aware of how that connects to the world around us. And so I'm very forthcoming, front kind of person. I don't mind putting things out there to people. And so let me tell you this. I've talked about it before. I'll continue to talk about it and share it with you guys. I have PTSD. I have PTSD from many, many different things. And if you don't know PTSD, it is called post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's not PTSD that you hear some people talking about, I went out and had a horrible date. Now I have PTSD from it. No, this is a little more serious. PTSD, there are multiple different types of PTSD. There's short-term, there's long-term, there's intermittent. Meaning short-term, meaning that you have something that's very traumatic that affects you for a short amount of time. You kind of struggle through it. Long-term, meaning that you have something that has long-term traumatic impacts on you. Intermittent, meaning that it comes and goes. And then you have this, PTSD that kind of goes into like a hibernation and then pops up at you at a later time in your life. I am super fortunate in that I have had intermittent, I've had long-term, I've had the hibernating, I've had all kinds of PTSD. And so it was like a therapist just dream when I walked into their office for some cognitive behavioral therapy. And I say all this because here's the thing that I learned as I was going through and learning to come to grips with PTSD, is that we are all creatures of experiences, and our emotions, fears predominantly, and the strengths and weaknesses that we bring, the values and the ideas that we were raised on, all of those create our actions. And so, for example, if you're somebody who had older siblings, And those older siblings love to, come up behind you and flick you in the ear. Well, that would create an emotion and a driver for reactions. And so if somebody comes up behind you and maybe they're going to put their hand on your shoulder from behind you to let you know they support you, but they came really close to your ear and all you thought about was that they were going to thump your ear. Why? Because that kind of thing happened to you. Then you've got a reaction. And so understanding what emotions are driving actions and reactions is super critical to emotional intelligence. You can't manage anything. You can't be high EQ or manage anything if you're not aware of your own drivers. And so, a lot of times when you hear about people with PTSD, you hear about violence or alcoholism or drugs. And yes, these are very, very common in people who have PTSD. Why? Because it's a way that you can numb or get rid of that feeling or try to be in control. Well, if you're that kind of leader that is kind of dictatorial now, a lot of that is driven from PTSD, from experiences that you had. And so you've got to understand those, and you've got to be self-aware of your emotions. When you become self-aware, that doesn't mean that it gets better. That doesn't mean that it gets easier. When I say I have PTSD, I went through a full cognitive behavioral therapy. I went through all this different development, all these different pieces to be able to be very functional. But that doesn't mean that I don't still have PTSD. I still do. I still have reactions. I still have drawbacks and different things like that. And so we've got to understand that's going to happen. But an awareness of it helps you become better. And that's why we call it self-awareness. Okay. It's not about self-fixing. You're not there to fix yourself because there's nothing wrong with you. What you need to do is be aware of these emotions and be aware of the reactions. And so when you're talking about emotional intelligence, first thing you have to have is self-awareness. You have to be aware of what your triggers are. One of the things I like to ask when I'm interviewing for new leaders to come work with me, one of the things that I ask them is, tell me what a pet peeve of yours is in your employees. Like, what annoys you? If you have an employee that does X, Y, Z, what is it? What is it that would drive you crazy? I ask them, what would drive you crazy from your boss? Like, what would a boss do that would drive you crazy? What about an organization as a whole? What would just drive you crazy about an organization as a whole? And so I get some really, really, really unique answers. But the bottom line is that tells me their awareness of things that set them off. For me, attendance and being on time and being in dress code and taking pride in how you look. Well, obviously a lot of that came from the military. And so when I see people that aren't, I have to understand that, is that my bias, or is that, are they really, not representing me very well? So first is that self-awareness. Secondly, then, it becomes self-regulation. And that's where that ties into that awareness. So one, now that we have an awareness of our emotions, our strengths, our weaknesses, our values, our drivers, and we have that high self-awareness, we can have a balanced perspective now. Now we have to manage those emotions and impulses. And so again, I go back to when I see something that would trigger me or set me off, then I would, my impulse was to react in a certain way. And so I'll tell you, in my PTSD, my impulses were generally withdraw, emotionally disconnect, drive a wedge, push people off, things like that. That's my impulse to those emotions. And so understanding and being self-aware of it helped me to regulate. And so I wasn't making impulsive decisions. I wasn't just letting those quick impulses, those reactions I wasn't reactive as much as I was decisive. And so making that decisive, actions based on your true emotion and understanding that emotion really reduces stress. I'm going to tell you 110%, when you're not just going crazy and bouncing around like a chicken with your head cut off, it is so much easier. One day I'm going to get a co-host so that I can take a drink without you guys having a weird pause and hearing a gulp. That's going to be, there's my self-awareness for today, but I'm going to manage that by taking another drink. Drinking this really cool berry tea stuff. Anyway, so self-awareness leads to self-regulation. And those are, I'm going to tell you 110, you cannot have a high EQ. You cannot be an emotionally intelligent leader if you don't first focus on understanding yourself and regulating your emotions. And I don't mean, when I say regulate, I don't mean that you need to mask them, that you need to bury them, that you need to, I'm not talking about it like a regulator. I'm talking about managing them by understanding them and understanding, okay, well, I'm reacting because of this emotion, or I'm reacting because of this weakness, or this is a trigger or a driver for me, and that's why I want to react that way. But by having that thought process, all of a sudden it changes the entire perspective, and you're going, okay, do I really need to react in that way? No, I don't need to be overreactive. So again, I go back to, when I have somebody who shows up and they just look like, their sleeves are rolled up, they're not wearing a tie, or, for a professional job, or maybe they're wearing, a shirt that's wrinkled in the interview. And I'm just like, my first impulse is going to be, they obviously do not want the job. But then I stop and I think to myself, okay, I have that impulse because a lot of military background, and then we were really drilled into appearances, everything. But let me think about it, and let me ask them, and let me be empathetic and understanding, and talk to them about, dress and things like that. And in a lot of cases, I find out it's because they either don't know how to be a professional or dress professionally, or they didn't have the liquid funds to be able to iron a shirt, or to be able to they threw it in the. I mean, I actually had somebody that had just a shirt that it was wrinkled. It wasn't terrible, but it was wrinkled. But it was because they didn't have an iron. And they were so, I mean, literally this person took the bus and then walked to get to the interview because they didn't even have money for gas or anything. Like, they were on their last leg, but they spent, $1.50 running them through a coin dryer 3 times to try to get the wrinkles out. Why would I not want that person? But because my initial emotion and impulse was that they're not interested, I would have shut them down normally and been done. And so understanding that and understanding my emotions and my triggers, and then I'm not burying it, but because I'm aware of it, I'm able to manage it and then utilize it to find out more. And that opens perspective so much. Anyway, so third, we talk about motivation. Motivation is a key aspect, being able to be driven to achieve for the sake of achievement. If you're only trying to achieve because you want money or fame or power, you've got a great motivation for you. That's it. But if we're talking about leaders, then you need to be able to be driven to achieve for the sake of achievement, to be resilient and inspire others to achieve. It's not about self-sacrifice, but selfless sacrifice. Meaning I'm not giving up me for others, but I'm giving for others. And so I love, just being able to say I've done these things. I love being able to say, hey, we're number one, or being competitive, or getting, when I went through graduate school recently, and when I went through this institute with Christian leadership recently, and these 2-year programs, and it's not like I didn't get anything from it, y'all. I didn't get a raise. I'm not more power, none of that. But it was the fact that I was able to do them and grow. That's what you need to be able to get yourself motivated to achieve for achievement's sake, for your sake, for your development, for your growth. And so really look at what your motivations are. When I talk about motivation, it's not just about, hey, I need to motivate others, but what's your motivation? What's your motivation in being a leader? What's your motivation in doing what you do? So self-awareness, self-regulation. What's your motivation? Are you empathetic? Fourth, are you empathetic? Do you understand and consider others' feelings, especially when you're making decisions? Do you build strong relationships, foster that supportive work environment? We talked a lot about empathy because empathy and engagement were earlier in this season. And so I'm not going to dive into that a ton. If you aren't sure if you're empathetic, here's the simple way that I always put it. If you're empathetic, then you understand and consider others' feelings when you're making a decision. If you're sympathetic, then you change standards for other people. If you don't care either way, then you're probably not in a position of leadership, or you're not going to last very well in one. And then fifth, of course, is social skills. We have to be able to manage relationships. We need to be able to move people in desired directions, meaning that we need to be able to show them the direction that's going to be most effective for them. Social skills communicates effectively, resolves conflicts, leads their team. It develops trust. And so, again, I went back to talking about engagement and empathy and communication earlier this season. It all comes together. Strategic communication, of course, is understanding time, place, and how, and understanding emotion. That's social skills as well. But when your people trust you and they say, I'm not a super fan of this decision, but I trust you. You've never steered me wrong, or you've always led me in a good direction. I've always seen where it ends. You've always shown me the right way. That's what you want to get. When you're managing your relationships with others, you're not moving them in a direction that is in your best interest, but it's in the organization's best interest and in their best interest. You need to find that combined best place. One of my favorite, I'm telling you, one of the most gratifying things as a leader for me, and it may be different for you. If it is, I hope you'll tell me. But for me, one of the most gratifying things that I hear from people is that I don't understand right now, but I trust you because you've always steered me in the right direction. They hear me. I'm trying to explain to them what I'm doing and where I'm taking them. And in some cases, you just can't. You just can't explain, or you can't show them what direction that you're taking them in. You're just trying to do the best that you can in driving them in that direction. But when they've seen the results and you've taken them in the right direction and they've seen the results of it, that is so gratifying as a leader. And that's about that effective communication, effective conflict resolution, effectively being fair, effectively being direct, being open and transparent. Social skills, there's so many things that you're just balancing in that. It is so challenging for somebody who's very, very, maybe very structured, organized, analytical, driver, even expressive. Social skills, because it's a mixture of all of those. And so I got to tell you, if I could define that and bottle it or put it into a training program, I would just quit working and be a motivational speaker and make all my money off of that. But it's so different for everybody. Your ultimate goal, I can tell you the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is that your people trust you, that your people, follow, and that you're putting them in the best direction for the organization and for them. And it has to be in that order. And most of them understand that, because without the organization, they have no opportunity. There is no direction for them there. You have to think of it, the organization is the roadmap, it's the destination, it's the transportation, everything along the way, and we're just getting them in the car. Without that car and without the roadmap and then they have no destination, no direction. And so we have to have clear direction for them in the organization and for them. So these are the 5 key elements, key aspects of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, your motivation, empathy, and social skills. How would you implement emotional intelligence in leadership? Well, there's some of these things that we really just talked about recently, but I'm going to come back into them. And I'm not going to dive into the major. I'm going to give you again, because I am going to tell you, I feel like I am repetitive in some instances, but it is really good to understand how these tie together. And so when I'm talking about emotional intelligence, one, it takes that clear and direct communication. So go back to like episode 2 in this, or not episode 2, I'm sorry, episode 3 in this season. We're talking about strategic communication part 1. In part 2, episodes 3 and 4, we're talking about clear and direct communication. Transparency builds that trust. You can't give them direction if they don't trust you to take them. And so leaders have to communicate openly about decisions, communicate clearly about expectations. You have to show, mentor, teach, train them how to do them. And then you've got to observe and hold accountability to those expectations. If I show you how to do something and then I observe you do it and you're doing it right, and I've explained what the expectation is, but I never follow up and do accountability, then all of that goes to crap. And so it's teach, mentor, train, then you show them, then you observe them do it, but once they've got it, and if they don't get it, go back and start again. Teach, mentor, train, show, observe. Do they have it? Yes. Then move to the final step, accountability. And we miss the follow-up and accountability, that final part, because we're just so grateful that they finally got it. Or maybe we had to go through that 3 different times. Now, I will tell you, my rule of thumb has always been teach, mentor, train, show, observe. If they don't got it, go back and do it again. Or maybe have somebody else in your organization do it. Maybe they'll explain it to them better. But you teach, mentor, train, you show them how to do it, and then you observe them doing it. And if they don't get it 3 times, then it's probably not you. Maybe it's not the right place for them. And so once they've got it, though, you've got to have that expectation, which it means accountability and follow-up. So clear and direct communications, number 1, you have to have to implement emotional intelligence in your leadership role. 2, you've got to create a supportive environment. You have to allow calculated risk. You have to encourage those. And so, we talk about, again, adapt and innovation earlier in the season. You've got to create a culture that embraces smart risk taking and celebrates successes and failures. If you're going to screw it up with style, which means own your failures. Own your screw-ups. If you mess up, own it, take it, and move on down the road. Quit wallowing in it. Quit trying to hide it. Quit trying to push it off on somebody else. Quit trying to point the fingers elsewhere. Quit being a victim. and go out and just own your failures. Celebrate them. Third, you have to have personalized recognition. Recognizing unique contributions. Again, we talked about this earlier. You've got to make it personalized to what they did. That boosts morale, that reinforces positive behaviors. Just talked about that last episode in developmental feedback, which brings us to number 4. You've got to have that constant feedback. You've got to be able to guide that individual in team development. You have to give constant feedback and consistent feedback to ensure that your team members are aware of where their progress is, where they need to develop, and where they're growing. There are coaches for professional players, and they've been doing it for years, decades. They have personal coaches that they go pay thousands and millions of dollars to continue to develop them, because they need continuous feedback. Why do you think that your employee doesn't? Drives me bonkers. And then 5th, we've got to have empathetic listening. Again, going back to earlier this season, we talked about strategic listening. If you didn't listen to that, shame on you, because that's really ironic. But go back and listen to that. Listen to empathetic listening and understand that we have to be active listeners, empathetic listeners, so that they feel valued, they feel validated in their emotions. Doesn't mean that we have to make a decision based on that. That's sympathy. Empathy means that we understand and we value and validate their emotions, but we maintain our standards and expectations. They have to feel heard and valued. So when we're talking about the power of emotional intelligence and leadership, it can't be overstated. I can show you data and facts and statistics time and time again, where understanding and addressing that EI challenge, we foster that sense of culture, or that we foster that sense of trust, that innovation, that resilience, where we can be so much more successful than our counterparts. If you're listening right now, that's because you read the blurb, you listened to the beginning, and you said, I want to be emotionally intelligent. Well, I'm telling you, there's so much to it, and there's so much that we've talked about in Ascend Leadership. And so if you didn't go back through, if you haven't listened to that, I'm going to highly, highly, highly encourage, go back and listen. Because every part of that is a key part of having that emotional intelligence, because that is transformational leadership. That is what we've been talking about all season long. And so all of the data and stats that I've given you all season long about, 44% increase in retention and 14% increase more in productivity and income, and all of these different data and stats that I've shown you, that's from leaders that are emotionally intelligent. They have fostered a culture of trust, innovation, resilience. And we can develop our emotional intelligence. We can develop that through focusing on, again, those 5 key things of self-awareness, self-regulation, understanding our self-motivation, understanding and considering and being empathetic, and then by having good, strong social skills, we can develop that emotional intelligence, and in turn, that's going to empower our teams to achieve their full potential. Together doing these things, together as a team, we, and when I say we, it's not the royal we. I am talking to me and you together. You, the listeners, and the people who are giving me feedback and who are bringing this show to life, we can navigate complexities of leadership. We can ascend our teams to unprecedented heights of success by sharing and empowering each other, and understanding that we are a peer network right here through this show. We are a peer network that we can grow and ascend to new heights, new leadership, new opportunities and ideas that become totally different than anything that we've ever thought that we could do. And so use this opportunity, use this platform, use me, just as I'm using you, to continue to grow in my leadership and become a stronger, more emotionally intelligent leader and to be effective and to grow a whole new level of leadership. I'm looking forward to continuing this journey, and I'll listen and see you guys next time on the Matt Largent Concert.
And like that, he's gone.